Well, hi then. I'm Chris. Thank you for coming. It's a lot nicer to have an audience to talk to than to stand here and talk by myself. And I hope this will be informative to you, no matter what your walk in life is. Self-compassion and outness and well-being among transgender individuals is our topic. And I'm hoping you guys already knew that before you got here. Is that right? I'm from Oklahoma State University. I'm here doing an internship with the counseling psychology program in the counseling services department. I'm familiar with very few of the students, unless you're over there, and I haven't taught any subjects other than mindfulness. If you've had a chance to be involved with the Feel Better Fasts, which I highly recommend, and we're going to talk about a little bit while I'm here. Been involved with that just a little bit. I spend most of my time counseling and hopefully helping people learn more about some of the diversity that you do have here on campus as far as the LGBTQ population. I try to focus my studies there because they are an underserved population. So with that, I'll just get started. Wendy, do I have a clicker or am I using the mouse on the computer? Okay, so some of the topics we're going to cover. We're going to talk about stressors that impact students. Do you guys ever find yourself being a little bit stressed out?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Picking classes? Is that what I heard just a minute ago?
Yeah.
Intersecting identities? What do you guys know about that? How do we identify?
Sorry, what did you say?
How do we identify? A lot of different ways? One way? Does one title carry us through?
Special way. And sometimes they're conflicting.
Sometimes. Sometimes they're multiple. We're going to talk about gender identity and outness. For some people, that's not anything that takes a lot of thought or understanding. Sometimes it's not quite as clear-cut. So we're going to talk about emotional well-being. There's a lot of things in life that can get us off balance emotionally, and having a good, steady well-being helps you function well no matter what you're doing, whether you're at work or you're at school or you're trying to enjoy yourself in leisure time. And so we're going to talk about self-compassion too. Have any of you ever heard of self-compassion?
Not really compassion for yourself, because oftentimes people already care about themselves, but I mean, definitely for others.
Okay. It's not something that a lot of psychologists are not even all that familiar with it. The term has been around for a while, and it's kind of became more known in the psychology world since around 93, I think, somewhere around there. So those are the things we're going to talk about. Some of the things. So what are some of the stressors that college students face?
School.
School? And what's involved with that?
Workload.
Workload? Yeah?
Working while trying to go to school. Like trying to make ends meet, and
Yeah.
also
Really tough schedules? Yeah? A lot of that, right? Especially with Aggieville just right down the road, huh?
yeah. Trying to find a community. I think freshman students struggle with that a lot. I know I did. Like when you first get here and you're all by yourself, it's hard to learn how to make friends again, because oftentimes you haven't since you were a child. So.
Yeah. Anything else? I think you guys are hitting on a lot of the really important things. Hectic schedules, being away from family. A lot of times it's not easy making new friends. A lot of times the curriculum's a lot harder once you get to college if you've come straight out of high school, or maybe if you haven't come straight out of high school, you know, the curriculum's not even the same as what you were familiar with when you stopped going to school. Loss of social support. Sometimes that happens when people move away from family. Not always. Sometimes people find support when they get there. And being unfamiliar with new surroundings. That, you know, there's something comforting about being somewhere where you feel like you know what to expect, you know who you can expect to give you a friendly smile. So So what kind of social factors do you think impact college experiences? Kind of along the same lines.
Wanting to fit in.
Okay. Finding people you're comfortable with.
Trying to go with the social norm, I guess. Like
Yeah.
partying and stuff. You'll want to fit in, so you might start to party if
Yeah.
you didn't.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought it would. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we are actually recording, and I don't know if we have anybody out there on Zoom or not. We do have someone, so it'd be nice for them to be able to hear what we're
Okay,
talking
yeah.
about.
Sorry, I
So,
thought this was picking it up, but.
I'm sorry, I forgot to say anything. So really, some of the social stigma is a social factor that we have to consider. What is the world's message about your people? Who you identify with? What does the world have to say about them? Is it heteronormative? Is it typically Caucasian race? Those kind of social factors factor into what kind of experiences someone can have at college. Your racial identity. What does that mean to you? Myself, most people assume I'm white. I am white, but I'm also Native American. Not everybody would know that meeting me. So what does it mean for me? Part of my identity is not visible. Ethnic identity, what group of people do you think like? It has more to do with like your culturally, what's your norms for where you grew up. Sometimes that has a can have a very religious connotation. I mean, a lot of people identify very strongly with their faith in their church. A lot of that weekly schedule, week in, week out, has to do with going to church and spending time with people that are there. Your sexual identity, who do you like to sleep with? That's what that's all about. Who are you attracted to? Who are you affectionately attracted to? And gender identity, who do you go to sleep as? How do you identify as a person? That can be, some people see that as binary. Some people see that on a continuum of maybe masculine and feminine and not necessarily male or female. So of those identities, which of those intersect? What does that intersection look like? It can look a lot of different ways, right? It can be a black, heterosexual woman living in the Midwest. You could be a homosexual male living in Arizona. Life can look differently to you depending on what those intersections are. So it has to do with race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. What do you guys think about that? Does that have any bearing on our lives?
Oh, yeah.
You like to talk about that, please?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it
Look
does.
closer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would definitely say that it does. Oftentimes, whoever you hang out with is usually on the same economic status as you, or like people that you went to high school with, or, even college, you often, I don't know, develop a community with people that are on the same basis as you.
There's open doors and there's shut doors, right? When it has to do with socioeconomic status. If you don't have the funding to go take in a football game every night or, whenever they're playing, you don't get to socialize with those people that do that, right? So it does have bearing. How you identify as heterosexual or homosexual, asexual, bisexual, pansexual, we pretty much got a lot more description there than what people used to identify as, right? Any thoughts on that? Does that have anything to do with your college experience and your...
I'm glad that pansexual is up there because I happen to be pansexual, and that is important because I see that a lot of the time where they'll talk about like heterosexual or homosexual, and then sometimes bi is thrown in, but mostly like asexual and pansexual do get forgotten, and then there's everything else in between that as well. So I think those intersecting identities are very important with just kind of broadening that as well.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Demisexual, I don't know, there's more, right?
This might sound stupid, but what is a pansexual? Like, would you?
Use the mic if you would, please.
It may not be gender related. So like I've had past relationships with those who may be like transgender. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you can, the prefix pan, like you can think of, what is one word, panorama, pandemic. It means like, I think all encompassing is a good word I would think of to use. Anybody want to throw in a definition, please feel free. Go ahead, Sam. Here, let me let that person hear you out there, because you got a lot to say.
How do you know I have a lot to say?
I'm anticipating.
Okay. So there's a lot of debate about this in the queer community, but some people feel that saying that you're bisexual implies that either you're only attracted to people who have binary genders, or you're implying that there only are two binary genders. And some people who feel that way prefer to use the term pansexual to indicate that there are many more genders than two, and that they are attracted to potentially all of them. But some people who say bisexual mean the same thing.
It's true. Very good. Thank you. Bisexual seems to be a more understandable and identifiable word, and I think people are just more comfortable with it. And in actuality, bisexual people historically have been left out not only by the heterosexual community, but also sometimes by the homosexual community. So, a barrier for them in their identity. So with more descriptors there, male and female are pretty common. Intersex is something that you don't know so much about unless you have maybe had experience with a family member or something, or you're part of the LGBTIQA2 community. I like to get them all in there because they're all important. But historically, intersex people have been possibly forced by their families or doctors to choose a gender. And I think that the medical field maybe is moving a little more away from that now, and maybe leaving it up to parents a little more. And a lot of parents are not as hung up on binary sexuality. So that's changing. Transgender, people that are not comfortable with their born identity, and I think I've got a definition of there somewhere in that. They're not congruent with who they feel they are inside with how the world sees them, how they were identified at birth. Gender nonconforming. What do you think how do you guys see that? Gender nonconforming. What does that mean?
I don't know. I definitely have heard of it before. Basically, this is probably really rough, but someone who doesn't choose or define themselves as male or female all the time. They are very fluid with their identity, I guess, and they don't choose one or the other.
Okay.
They're just in between.
They kind of say no to the social norms that our world has established, right? They kind of say, no, you can keep that. I don't have to identify myself one way or the other. So, what is gender identity? Anybody want to take a shot at that? I think I've kind of alluded to it a little bit. Right?
So, have any of you heard of the genderbread person? Okay, I might actually have a printout of it, but the genderbread person is awesome. And it's basically like a stick figure or a stick figure made of gingerbread. And what people generally think of as sex is what's between your legs and then the associated hormones. Your gender as what you see yourself in your head, so male, female, neither, both. And gender identity is the way that you express your gender, which may or may not align with your sex. And so gender identity on the genderbread person would be something all over that person. So inside and outside.
Very good. Thank you. Very good description. So going back a little bit to some of the theorists and gender scholars, what they say is it's how deeply a person self-identifies with either masculine traits experienced as a boy or a man or a male, or feminine traits expressed as a girl, woman, or female, or experienced and expressed somewhere along that continuum of masculine and feminine characteristics. And there's a cultural understanding attached to that of what it means to be feminine or masculine, right? Because it differs. It's different countries, different expectations about what that means. So, your level of outness, we've kind of covered, some of the things there that could be salient things about experience at college and identities and how you fit in. Your level of outness is the amount of your true self that you reveal to the world, right? So we're all out in different areas at different levels depending on how much you share of yourself with other people. Do your friends and family know your gender identity? For most of the population, there's not much question there. There's a lot of people that are okay with how they have been labeled at birth as male or female, and there's never any problem, and they're okay with that. It's not the picture for everyone. Are you comfortable showing affection to your partner in public? That runs a little more along sexual identity, but it relates to outness. Some people don't feel comfortable expressing affection with who they are seeing because of what society has to say about it. So is there a part of you, do you feel you must hide a part of you at your work or your university, your school, whatever you're doing? Sometimes it's not easy to be open, right? To be out. So gender identity has a little bit of a different coming out process than people would talk about with sexual identity. Sometimes with sexual identity, you can choose to expose yourself or not. It's not really something that you're not cornered into doing if you don't want to. But with gender identity, coming out oftentimes means that you're only going to come out with people you're comfortable with. So a lot of times those supportive, intimate partners or family or friends are the first people that know about someone coming out. Maybe later on, people that you think may be not so supportive, it might be a little bit tougher crowd to come out to. Family that you know where they stand. Maybe there's religious issues there that prevent them from aligning themselves with you. And just various people in your life. Some of the challenges related to coming out could be loss of those relationships, right? Could be loss of a lot of things. Could be monetary loss. Could be funding for college. Many times there's discrimination. Often there's social isolation. Some of the benefits, now this is from research done with an LGBT population concerning self-compassion, because we've got that in the background we're still going to talk about, okay? Some of the benefits included improved well-being. The more people you came out to, the less depression that showed up, maybe decreased, anxiety and stress. And why do you think that is? What do you think's going on there?
You feel that you don't have to hide anymore, and you're not afraid that, you kind of confront yourself and those that you love, and you're just like, if you don't want to be around me, okay. And you kind of have already crossed that bridge.
Yeah.
You don't have to hide.
Yeah. It kind of feels good to be able to be yourself, right? No matter what capacity it is. If you're dating somebody your parents don't approve of, and you're having to sneak around and see them times when your parents aren't around or something like that, and then finally you get tired of that and you tell them. There might be repercussions of that, right? But yet that weight's lifted off of you of, I'm not hiding this anymore, So there's a little bit of relief just in being able to tell somebody something about you. So research on transgender well-being. the transgender community is not studied that much. It hasn't been historically. This is relatively new for a lot of society. It's not a new thing. It's been around forever. But only since, like mid 20th century has this been something that people have really started to look at. So it's an underserved and understudied population. Transgender individuals generally have elevated levels of mental health concerns. Now, there's a lot of reasons behind that. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have a flawed mental health themselves. A lot of that has to do with messages that they receive from society. Equates to a lot of sometimes discrimination. Hatred and negativity are not too strong of words to use there, because sometimes that's the case. I am from Oklahoma, and to my knowledge, there's no reported deaths of transgender people within the last, 20 years that I know of. I don't know of any before then, but I know that in Wichita, right when I moved here, May of 2016, there was a death in Wichita of a transgender woman. So it's not like it's far removed from us. I moved closer to it, actually. I moved closer to some of the discrimination and hate crimes. I'm going to call them crimes because that's what they are. Those are happening even closer to where I'm living. I'm not sure we'll get this. Might. Not. I'm not going to get that, am I, Wendy?
What it's like to be transgender. This is America. Population 318 million. If all these little plastic people were the population, the total trans population would be this person. That's about 0.3% of the US population. And they're facing an uphill battle. A survey of nearly 6,500 transgender people in 2008 revealed the trans population was unemployed at twice the rate of the general population. Those rates are doubled for transgender people of color. Almost half, 47%, said that they were fired, not hired, or denied a promotion because of being transgender. And 90% said that they faced some form of discrimination just because of their gender identity. As a result of this, 71% hide their gender or gender transition. Discrimination doesn't stop at work either. Now let's talk about housing. Transgender people have less than half the national rate of home ownership. 32% compared to the 67% of the general population that owns their own home. 19%, or nearly 1/5 of transgender people, have been homeless at some point. The housing situation is bad, but healthcare may be worse. Hormone therapy or certain surgeries to change physical characteristics are only covered by Medicaid in 7 states. And 19% of trans people had been denied healthcare based on their sexual identity. Because of all these problems, a lot of the trans community has turned to alcohol and drugs. They had 70% more drinking and drug problems to cope with mistreatment. And in terms of incarceration, trans people were 85% more likely to be imprisoned over people who hadn't lost their jobs due to bias. And then there's this. 41% of the transgender population in the US has attempted suicide, compared to just 4.6% of the general population. So think about that the next time you think gender identity is a choice.
What are your thoughts on that? Any?
I think it's heartbreaking. I didn't know all of the statistics, but I watch a lot of documentaries on stuff like this. And I did know that last statistic about suicide. And that is particularly troubling to me. And it's horrible to hear people say that, like, derogatory things about them, or say, like, a man, he's dressed as a woman, and truly that's how they identify. Like, these people go through terrible struggles to be who they are, and the fact that almost half of them at least try to kill themselves at least once is just like one of the number one signs that like that is not just a choice, that is who they are, and the way that people treat them deeply affects them when they go against like who they are.
Appreciate that statement. That shows some insight too, to realize that if it were a choice, probably almost half of the people making that choice wouldn't make it, right? Because who wants to die early? You know? So there's research that supports the benefits of coming out, such as better psychological well-being, higher self-esteem, less depression, reduced anxiety. There's also research that indicate there's a lot of risk involved with that too. Coming out's not easy, and it can include a lot of alienation. Criticism, it's very prevalent. Sometimes it's not ever going to go away because maybe there are characteristics about that person that are always going to make people are going to view them differently because of their characteristics. Physical abuse, humiliation, employment difficulties is a huge problem. This kind of stuff can develop into what we refer to as internalized transphobia, where the trans person begins to believe that message that's out there, that they're not deserving of fair treatment. And this can happen in other, you can think of children in abused homes, maybe, who grow up believing that they're not worthy or they're not good because they've been abused. It's not easy to not let that process happen. Trans people often feel shame for being different. Being secluded is a big deal. Lack of community encouragement. And things like that happen from discrimination, like not being able to get housing, not being able to get a job, not having enough money to take care of yourself and or your family. Feeling alienated is never a good feeling, right? Coming to college as a freshman is kind of unnerving, isn't it? I made it a month my first time. I was like not able to deal with that much alienation. Sometimes the transgender community may be the only resource. And we're in, are we central? We're north central Kansas. You don't have a lot of support systems going on out here for transgender people, do you? That I'm aware of, not a lot. Maybe on campus there's more. So minority stress, or this kind of stress, I won't just say minority, it's very often ongoing, and sometimes it's not going to go away. For trans women, many of the deaths that happen every year are with trans women, a lot of them trans women of color, because they're not able to hide characteristics that have a natural process of their body of being born male. Adam's apple, hair on their face. They're never going to completely disappear in society, and society is not always kind about that. It may not ever go away. So the field of psychology has for a long time known that belonging is a basic human need, right? And it has repercussions, both psychologically and physically. The distress sometimes that transgender people experience has a lot to do with these high mental health rates that you see. It's more about the pushback from society sometimes than it is from a person's own, maybe, cognitive distortions. And those rates are even higher than the LGBT population and PAN. Make sure we don't leave the PAN population out. So these stressors are often managed with coping styles that are not healthy, like you've seen. What was it? 71%? Drugs and alcohol? A lot of people manage their mood by drugs and alcohol, right? When the stressors are high, maybe it's more than a person can handle. Other unhealthy practices can surface: cutting, burning, all those things listed there. So some of that distress might be related to some of the challenges that are there being a transgender person and some of the things that have to happen. Like getting legal documentation changed is not an easy process. It's not always an inexpensive process. Some states it might cost more than others. But if you don't have a lot of financial support, getting that changed is a problem. Being fired. It's easy in a lot of states, like Oklahoma is a right-to-work state, and you don't have to have a reason to fire somebody. You don't have to prove anything. You can just come in today and say, Chris, sorry, you're out of here. And there's no job. And so say a person's midway through transitioning and they're looking for employment, their opportunities may be very limited to actually find somebody that's willing to put them to work. Unemployment is a problem, low income. So research says the relationship between social support and emotional well-being is huge, that there's a relationship there. Positive coping behaviors help buffer negative life events, right? Going down Aggieville, getting drunk every night is probably not a good idea for feeling depressed, right? Considering the strong relationship between self-compassion and psychological distress, mindfulness-based and self-compassionate practices should be introduced to those who experience emotional distress. So I appeal to a crowd of people here that are not just transgender. Self-compassion is a really fantastic way for achieving and maintaining good mental well-being. Here's some of the findings from my own studies that I will be defending hopefully in a month or so. I interviewed I surveyed 230 people. Some of those were from students from KSU, KU, some out in California. Self-compassion and outness as a transgender individual were significantly related to and predictive of psychological well-being. So the more out someone was, the higher their well-being was, the higher level of self-compassion they tended to have in my study. Those who embraced more self-compassionate thoughts and feelings and who were out to more people tended to report less psychological distress in general. So that tells a story, right? It could be that being out, they were more willing to be out because they were more willing to be compassionate to themselves and be okay with what society told them. What are your thoughts about this so far? If you have any you'd like to share. You guys have been really good to participate. And the wheels rolling, anybody?
I really enjoyed this. I was actually just thinking that I wish could have been a larger audience or directed more to the student body, just because I feel like at K-State, I don't know, I don't want to make any assumptions, but I don't know, I just know some people don't have this kind of information or aren't educated on transgender or really anything, and so they're very discriminatory towards them because they just don't know. And I truly think that is an issue why a lot of people are very hateful towards people that they don't understand.
Agree with you.
So I think, I loved this, and I wish everyone else on campus could be just as educated as we just were.
I agree. Sam, you got anything to say?
I thought that we've gotten a lot of really good information, and something that I guess I've been aware of for a while now, both in terms of trying to raise awareness about the situation and rights for transgender individuals and for the LGBT community in general. Is always a hard balance when you're trying to reach out to people beyond the community to convey the real and terrifying threat that LGBTQ plus people are facing, but also not paint them as people who need to be pitied or people who are only suffering because there's a lot of really incredible components of having these identities and being part of these communities. And obviously that's more accessible in certain parts of the country but I think that needs to always be part of the story too.
Great. Thank you for your comments, Sam. And you have to be pretty okay with yourself in the Midwest to be able to come out and be present and be willing to educate people, because you're absolutely right. It's education that changes things. And it's exposure, right? So what does it mean to be a compassionate person? And we're going to move through these pretty quickly because I want to leave you with a few things, but I want you to get this part. That was our informative session on transgender issues and identity. Do you notice when other people are suffering? And do you feel moved by others' suffering so that your heart responds to their pain? Do you realize suffering, failure, and imperfection is part of the shared human experience? Self-compassion comes from an Eastern concept. What is it? It's just now making its way into Western psychology, like mid-1990s, and it's helping people understand well-being better. And it's inviting people to develop mindfulness-based interventions. Self-compassion is defined by being touched by and open to one's own suffering, not avoiding or disconnecting from it, but generating the desire to alleviate one's suffering and to heal oneself with kindness. Self-compassion includes offering non-judgmental understanding to one's pain, inadequacies, and failures as part of the larger human experience. So, there's your definition. Do you consider yourself a self-compassionate person? So this is not just about understanding others. This is about having compassion and understanding ourselves, right? Do you notice your own suffering? How much do you acknowledge your own pain? What happens when you are suffering? What messages do you send to yourself when you're hurting? And how do you see pain and suffering? Is it part of being human, and are you connected to those experiences? It involves being kind and understanding to oneself in instances of pain or failure rather than being harshly self-critical. And perceiving one's experiences as part of the larger human experience rather than seeing them as isolating. And holding painful thoughts and feelings in mindful awareness rather than over-identifying with them. So one of the things I found in my research was that people that over-identified with their thoughts had lower levels of self-compassion. You guys, I will share slides with you if you're wanting some of this, so I don't want you to feel like you have to hurriedly write down things. I want this information to be in your hands. Self-compassion is a construct comprised of 6 dimensions viewed on a continuum of 3 areas that describe how a person relates to their self, looking at self-kindness versus self-judgment, how you relate to the world, common humanity versus isolation, and thoughts and feelings, mindfulness versus over-identification. Okay? 3 elements of self-compassion, again, same things. How do you treat your good friends? When something's going wrong with them, are you good to them? You try to make things better for them? And do you treat yourself the same way when things are going bad for you? A lot of us don't. Are you the same? How are you the same as others instead of what's different? What does it mean to be human? Are you able to be with what is in the present moment? This is a really important part of self-compassion is mindfulness. Are you able to accept the fact that you're suffering? Self-compassion helps. It improves mental well-being. That's what the research says, and increases the quality of life. In particular, people that are transgender experience higher levels of well-being when they have higher levels of social support and more involvement with the transgender community. So there's 2 pieces there. They receive and identify support from the trans community, but they also are not always surrounded by the transgender community. So, what about you and your self-compassion? Here's an example of how you could kind of test yourself with this. Are you aware of your own suffering? You can tell yourself, this is a moment of suffering right now. This is really hard right now, what I'm going through, and I'm really struggling. This is a part of life. It's not abnormal to feel this way. Anxiety is pretty natural with a lot of different situations, right? I know college and a doctoral program has been extremely anxiety-provoking for me. Suffering is a part of life, right? And many people are going through difficult situations. What happened? One of my monitors went out. All right, okay, so sorry. Can you be kind to yourself in a moment of suffering? And you can physically put your hands on your heart, and feel the warmth of your hands soothing you, right? Touch is healing. And you can assure yourself, I'm here for you, Chris. It's going to be okay. That doesn't have to be said out loud, but you can definitely say it out loud. Might give more meaning to it. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you this clip or not. Wendy, will I get this one? This is Kristen Neff, who has done all the research behind self-compassion. I hope it pulls up.
First thing is just to give yourself permission to treat yourself kindly. A
that
lot
loud
of
enough?
people think that it's selfish or that it involves self-pity. It's really not. Remember, self-compassion recognizes the shared human condition. It's not, woe is me, poor me. It's, life is difficult for everyone. So, and again, because it helps you give more to others, it's not selfish. So giving yourself permission to be kind, knowing that it's going to help you be happy, it's going to help others be happy. Then concrete things like noticing how you speak to yourself, asking, would I say this to a close friend? Usually not. What would I say to a close friend? Can I try treating myself that way? You can do this in letter writing. It's very effective. If you're really struggling, write yourself a letter in the same way that you would, again, what you would express to a good friend in the same situation, but write that to yourself. And then you can go back and read it. That's helpful. Probably one of the most helpful things, though, because we're mammals, we are programmed evolutionarily to respond to warmth, physical warmth, soothing touch, and gentle vocalizations. As mammals, when we, just like think of a mommy lion and her cub, we're programmed for our bodies to calm down and to feel safe and to feel soothed. So one of the most effective ways to give yourself compassion is through some physical gesture, because you're actually tapping into that mammalian caregiving system at a physiological level. So finding some touch that feels comfortable. A really common one might be to put both hands over your heart, or maybe on your belly, or cradle your cheeks, or do something like this. Some people just holding their hand. That can let your body know that you care, and then sometimes it's easier for your mind to follow after your body has calmed down a little.
You agree? So, she says, with compassion, with self-compassion, we give ourselves the same kindness and care we'd give to a good friend. So that is, for myself, that's a really good rule of thumb for me, and I've become more and more interested with self-compassion the more I've learned about it. In the Western world, we're not all that nice to each other or to ourselves all the time, because we're like a lot of goals, and you just need to toughen up and get out there and work harder, and that's kind of how we are sometimes. So you guys are welcome to screenshot that if you want. I have some links here. I think we're almost out of time. Do you have any questions, thoughts, anything you'd like to share? I really appreciate your participation. This has been really, really nice to spend some time getting to visit with you a little bit. These are all good sites. I'm more than happy to share the PowerPoint with you. I do have a survey, or not a survey, a measure of self-compassion if you're interested. It's just a short form, and it has been actually tested in a college counseling center. And their findings were that people that had come to counseling previously had lower self-compassion for whatever reason. I don't know that the information is out there about that, but they were able to measure it compared with people that had never had any counseling before. So that was an interesting finding. But there's that. And we also, I want to put in a little bit of a plug for the Feel Better Fast workshops, because they're going on now, and these concepts of mindfulness that are involved with self-compassion are 1 hour, one time a week for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And you get a chance to look at 3 or 4 presentation modules that help you learn how to be more mindful. It's kind of like exercise. It takes time to help your mind get developed to understand the value of being still and being mindful. You have to exercise. There's scientific information, brain scans that show that people that meditate a lot have different shaped brains in the frontal lobe area than people that don't meditate or meditate just a little. They have a lot of different research out there on that. So thank you for your time, you guys. This has been great. I appreciate it.